Ian Lees-Galloway.
Good choice, Mr Chairman. Thank you very much. First of all, before I address subpart 6, which is the part of the bill, part 3 that I intend to talk about, I just need to discuss the misrepresentation of my position made by Nikki Kay in her previous address, where she insinuated, actually she stated that I was opposed to the entire bill, where she obviously hasn't been listening very carefully to either my arguments or those of the entire Labour members in the House tonight, because we have been quite clear. There is only one part of this bill that we are opposed to, and we will get to that part shortly, I have no doubt. However, the problem with that part is that it overrides so many of the other good aspects of this legislation. So I just needed to clarify that. Ms Kay also brought up hobbits. I was quite pleased that she brought up hobbits and expanded the debate a little bit in that area, because what clearly the National Party is trying to do tonight, as they have done in the last few weeks, is to sow division. They're trying to tell New Zealand that Labour hates rugby and that we're opposed to the World Cup and that we don't want to get the job done. Well, actually, this is a very complex piece of legislation. Part 3 is a particularly complex piece of legislation, and it deals with applications and it deals with paperwork and processes that a number of people in New Zealand are going to have to go through, and it is important that we as a Parliament make sure that this gets the scrutiny that it deserves, so that when it finally is enacted, that it is usable and it makes sense. And I mean, there is a lot of red tape in here, and it's funny that the ACT Party hasn't actually taken any calls on it. The requests that are made of territorial authorities in Part 2 are again areas that I thought the ACT Party would have made a contribution on, but they didn't. But the National Party this evening in its contributions has been clear that it wants to drive a wedge between New Zealand and New Zealand as a whole and the Labour Party in its position tonight. And that is actually quite similar to the way it has dealt with the Hobbit. Contrast that with the way Helen Clark dealt with actually securing the Rugby World Cup 2011 for New Zealand. She built relationships. She built consensus. She brought all the parties together. There was even a sense of bipartisanship within the House.
Don Brash's photo was in the bid.
Don Brash's photo was in the bid document. There you go. So, you know, that is how much consensus Helen Clark sought to build around putting this bid together, and indeed was successful in securing the bid. Contrast that with the divisive approach that John Key has taken to the Hobbit, and now the fact that he has bent New Zealand over in the face of Warner Brothers. We are a corporation. We are a sovereign nation, and a corporation is coming to this country and telling us that we have to change our laws. And you know what? We are going to bend right over for them. That we say, how much indeed? How much? All that money is going directly to...
Order. Some of the members who have now got into a regular barracking will desist. Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I appreciate the assistance. I didn't really feel as though I needed it, but I do appreciate it.
Members should not comment on my rulings.
But I think it is reasonable, given some of the debate that we've heard from the National Party, to contrast that approach. Yes, again, they're trying to, they are misrepresenting Jackie Dean. I think it's Jackie Dean, it's hard to tell, but Jackie Dean is trying to misrepresent the position. Of course, Labour is in support of having the Hobbit in New Zealand. We worked very closely. Again, the Labour government built relationships with Warners, built relationships with New Line, built relationships with Peter Jackson, got consensus, and we were able to put the Lord of the Rings on in New Zealand without bending over in front of an American corporation. That's what John Key has done. He has bent this country over. Now, coming back to subpart 6, part 3 of the bill, Mr Chair. This refers to appeal rights. And appeals, clause 43 states that a person that applied for an approval, a declaration, a test approval or declaration, or a change of the conditions of an approval, a declaration, or a test approval or declaration, is dissatisfied with the determination of the authority under section 22(1) may appeal to the High Court. They may appeal to the High Court, but only on a question of law. Again, that clause 43, is very, very tight and very specific, Mr Chair.
Ian Lees-Galloway.
Thank you very much, Mr Chair. That clause 43 is very, very specific and tight about what an applicant may appeal on and the process through which they may appeal. But you know what? We may as well not even bother having that actual clause in the legislation because we've got Part 4. And actually, a savvy applicant who wasn't happy with the decision of the authority, if they had the right connections, perhaps if they were a member of the National Party, would simply appeal to Murray McCulley. That's all they'd have to do. They'd have to get the minister on side, and it doesn't matter how out of order their application was. Doesn't really matter where it went wrong. It doesn't matter whether it was destroying a historic building or whether it was outside of the scope of the Rugby World Cup. All the minister would have to do is, with one stroke of the pen, say approved. You may as well just take clause 43 out of the legislation altogether, because although it is a very practical and sensible appeal process, it is completely undermined by Part 4. Completely undermined by Part 4. And indeed, the right of appeal to the High Court may only be made on a question of law under Section 30, Section 31, Section 39 or 40(4). So it's a very, very tight method, an area which an applicant can appeal. But again, that definition, that narrowing of the areas in which an applicant can appeal may as well not be in the bill at all, because we have Part 4. And that is why, it's interesting they've gone awfully quiet, that is why we need to have the kind of scrutiny that we are putting on this bill, because we have got to question whether or not there aren't superfluous aspects of the bill, and in fact whether or not we might actually be able to make it a more efficient piece of legislation by simply trimming out some of the contradictions that lay within this bill. Another area of absolute specificity that is dealt with within Part 3 is this area of test events. And I actually have to agree with my colleague, the Honourable Trevor Mallard. When I first read it, because I haven't been on the Select Committee, because I haven't been involved with this bill up to this point, I was a little confused when I first read it. I thought it was referring to test matches, which of course there will be several of during the World Cup. So it took a couple of goes to read it, and again, well, yes, indeed, all the matches will be test matches. Is quite correct. We might not think that some of them rate as test matches, but I have to say on that, I am looking forward to having the test matches involving Georgia, the Ukraine, and I believe Argentina, and one other team which we're waiting with bated breath to see who it is, playing in Palmerston North. I am certainly looking forward to those games occurring in my city, and I know the city is gearing up for it. But this area of running a bit of a test event or testing out how you deal with traffic problems, or that sort of thing in the lead up to the World Cup shows that built into the legislation is a concern that we need to get the nuts and bolts right. And that is why we need to actually go through this with some serious scrutiny to make sure every single little clause in this piece of legislation is absolutely spot on, because the National Party have talked about, and they're absolutely right, this will be a wonderful event. It will showcase New Zealand and it'll put us on the world stage. If one of these things goes horrifically wrong because we haven't paid enough attention to it now, we will look worse on the world stage than we do right now, bent over in front of Warner Brothers. So we do need to make sure that we get these things right, and it is absolutely appropriate that we pay close attention. It is. The member, Aaron Gilmore, is absolutely correct. It is disgusting, the situation that we find ourselves in tonight, courtesy of the acquiescence of the Prime Minister. Now Mr Hedare is concerned that I'm using big words. This isn't the first time the National Party's been upset about big words.
Point of order. Point of order, Jackie Dean.
Thank you, Mr Chairman. It's just a phrase that the member used a little while ago, and I have to say I was a little bit taken aback by it.
Well, tell me what it is so I can rule on it.
Well, Bending over for Warner Brothers, I think was and I don't believe that's a parliamentary term.
I've been thinking about